this light would show up if there was a fault, which would mean basically that I had something wired backwards. Those are not lit up. That's good. There's a fault warning here, though. So I have to figure out what is causing that. All right, so very exciting. I'm starting to build my battery pack. I had a viewer comment and just asking if we were going to compress the batteries, and I hadn't considered it, so I looked into it, and it does look like it's a great idea. It's recommended by the factory, and so I've decided to compress them. And so then the next step was I had to make the box a little bigger, and then I had to make these inboards, which are just pieces of plywood with holes cut on either end and in the middle, and I'll run a bolt, run 2 bolts through each side and through the middle to hold these inboards together, and it'll just be all thread, and those bolts will compress the batteries and keep constant tension on them. The factory says it's supposed to add up to another 1,000 cycles, which is about 3 years of life to the battery, so looks like it'll be well worth doing. The other thing that we got to looking into was the need to insulate between the batteries, since we're doing all in series. I just finished up compressing the batteries, and I basically just did that by tightening each bolt until the lock washer is fully compressed. And from what I understand, that should be about 12 each as far as compression, so that's close enough. And I think that'll work pretty well. You know, the lock washers are a kind of spring, and so you get a little bit of spring action on the tension. So that's all I'm going to do. So those are compressed. Like I say, they have a vinyl divider in between each one and below. And I've put on some corner posts that I'll set the top on when I want to cover it to protect it. So my next step is to go ahead and put on the bus bars and get ready for the series connections, and then also hook up my BMS to each positive terminal. I'm using this diagram for connecting my battery cells in series configuration that I printed off of DIY Solar Forum. Has some good information on that site, and they have some free printouts. And I found that this one was the easiest to use. So I'm connecting 16 in series and using this alt layout right here for 48 volt system. So I'm just getting these bus bars on and in place and getting bolts in to hold them, just finger tight. I'm going to have to go back in and connect the wires from the BMS to each positive terminal, so I'm not ready to tighten them up fully yet, but I'm getting them in place and just getting the bolts in to hold them.
We're about to put up the last 3 panels. It's kind of a windy morning already, so we'll see how that goes.
All right, so I have the solar panels all connected, and so now the moment of truth to test the voltage and make sure we're good. So each solar panel is supposed to put out about 40 volts, and I have 2 in series, so I'm expecting to see north of 80. The reason it would be higher than 80 is because they're deadheaded. There's power doesn't have anywhere to go, and so it can be higher. It can be considerably higher. So I expect to see higher than 80 if everything is wired incorrectly. So the way to check that is with the voltmeter to put it on DC voltage, and then just connect the red to the red and the black to the black for each string. And so I'm going to do that here. Show 93 volts. Yep, nice solid 93 volts on that string. I have 2 strings. Here's the second one. 92 volts. So very close together for 2 completely different strings. I'm happy with that. That's how it should look. So I have all my wires coming in from the solar panels now, and I've made the connections there. They're ready to just snap together, and then they'll be connected to the rest of my system via that breaker and surge protector bar there. So that's pretty much ready to go. So my next step will be to run some outlets out of this AC electrical panel just to the outside of the connex here, probably running through kind of right there on the wall. And that will be the connection for our RV, and then also an outdoor outlet box where I can just run power tools off. Those will be the first two connections I make off the AC system. And then I also want to come over here and put a cover on these bus bars. And I also want to add another breaker down here. Quick disconnect for the batteries. Also another recommendation from a viewer, which I should have had in the system already, so that was a great reminder. I'm going to put that in as well. Getting ready to connect my BMS, and so in order to prepare for that, I'm adding connections to each individual wire. So there's about 19 wires, I believe, that I'm going to have to add connections to. This was the closest that I could find that would work. It's a little bit big for this size of wire, but it'll work. I needed something big enough to fit onto the bolt that connects to the battery. So I'll put this in between a couple of washers so that it gets a good secure connection, and also the bus bar gets a good secure connection to the battery. But this is the best way I could find to connect the BMS to the positive terminals. Kind of a long process. So I've made my final connections here, and I'm ready to put the cover on. I do want to show you in a couple places I had to put in a longer stud bolt right here on the negative terminal, and then over on the other side where I put in a custom-made bus bar that was a little thicker than the other bus bars. I had to use a longer bolt, and I did find the places where you screw the bolts into the battery. That receiver was it needed some babying. I mean, I felt like it would be really easy to strip it out and ruin the battery. So I had to be really careful with it and make sure that I used bolts that were long enough. So just be careful with that when you make your connections. So the breaker is in the off position now. Okay, so if you put a voltmeter across here, you can check your voltage. And you can see I have 52 volts. So just checking my polarity. It's really important before you open breakers that your polarity is correct. And get this on for safety, and then I'll be ready to fire up the system. So the system is finally all connected. I have the covers on. I have everything connected except the incoming wires from the solar panels, and those are ready to be connected, but I want to turn on the battery first and get that going. So the very first thing I'm going to do, now that I've double checked all my connections and all my wiring, is to open up this breaker here, which will allow power from the battery to come up into the controllers. And then I'm going to power on the controllers and go through the menus on those and get those set up for the batteries that we have. Once I get the controllers set up, then I'm going to make the connection. And actually I can also go and turn on my inverter, get that set up. Then I can go ahead and make the connection from the solar panels. Once I make that connection and I have incoming power, then my BMS will come on and I can set up my BMS. I'll actually set up my BMS last, but that's the order of operations here. And so if something goes bad, it'll happen really fast. So you'll immediately start hearing sizzling and see smoke. Okay. The smoke is not coming, so that's a great sign. So now we're on. I'm going to go ahead and check Voltage on this side. I should see the same as the other side. Yep. Alright, so now I can bring the voltage into my controllers. Alright, there we go. Nothing sounds bad. That's a very good sign. Alright. And they're coming to life. Alright, so they would show a fault here. There's a couple warning lights. This light would show up if there was a fault, which would mean basically that I had something wired backwards. Those are not lit up. That's good. There's a fault warning here, though. So I have to figure out what is causing that. Alright, so I finally got everything turned on. The power from the solar is now connected, so the input lines are connected, the breakers are all turned on. I have power coming into the inverter, or coming into the controllers. Charge controllers are on and charging. And so we're actually taking power from the sun and charging up the batteries right now. I did run into an issue with the BMS. So the BMS, according to the manual, takes a 5-volt differential between the battery and its inlet in order to start up, which means basically that you have to have the solar panels connected before the BMS will start, and that was messing up the order of operations, so I had to bypass it so that I could get the charge controllers turned on and set up just on the battery power, and then turn on the solar after. So I had to disconnect the BMS in order to get everything turned on, and here in a minute I'm going to give the BMS some power, a higher differential that it wants, so it'll turn on, and then I'll reconnect the BMS. Okay, in order to start my BMS, the Heltec BMS requires a 5-volt difference across the BMS itself. So the P- side is the upstream side, the B- side is the downstream side, and I have to get 5 volts higher on the upstream side in order for it to come on. So in order to do that, I'm going to try to put a regular 9-volt battery in series at the very end and add another 9 volts to the upstream side. So I'm ready to do that now. And that's not working. This is the positive side right here. So, okay, so I just had to take out the bypass. Alright, so it's on now. I gotta try to see if I can connect with the app. So the app that I uploaded earlier. It's scanning, it looks like it's found it. Awesome. This is awesome. Okay. Now I gotta figure out how to set it up. Okay, so for the last several days we have been using our solar system to power the RV and other things, but I had the BMS bypass, and so I've been talking to some people on the DIY solar forum, and they helped me out and helped me figure out how to get the BMS started. So this morning I was able to hook up just a little 9-volt battery in series and create the 5 volts differential I need in order to get the Heltec BMS to start up. That's one of the startup requirements for this particular BMS. So I got it to start up, and I did have a couple wires that had bad connections, so I had to diagnose those and fix those. But now it actually seems to be all functioning and operational as normal. I'm so excited. This system is finally completely done and in service.